Hi guys, welcome to Rootstem. In today's video I'm going to show you how to paint this model I like to call Lilith. It's a Death Maiden for Escher. Hi guys, thank you very much for joining me. As I've stated, in today's video we're going to be painting up this Death Maiden. This is going to be for the my Escher gang. It's quite a bright Death Maiden compared to some of the other tutorials I've seen, and of course it's very bright for Escher in general. I quite like the yellow and purple colour scheme that my gang has. So I'm trying to keep that as a theme, just to try and make sure that it mixes in with my gang. And it's a bit sneaky, because when I'm playing my games, of course, if people think it's just standard champion, then they might not shoot her as much as somebody else. So tactics all round. The model itself is kind of built up into two parts. You'll be able to see that actually in the video. So let's get into it. So we'll start by having a look at the undercoats, and this one here is of course Wraithbone. It's got a little bit bubbly, but it should be alright. And we've gone for Mechanica Standard Grey. Now the reason I've gone for those colours is with some of the hair I might use a thin down contrast paint because it might just be easier to do. And then with this, a lot of the colours that we're going to be using, like the yellows and the flesh, Mechanica Standard Grey is going to be a better base coat. Don't get me wrong, I'm going to have to use some black in here, but it's just going to be easy to layer that on with a nice mid-tone undercoat. So one of the first colours I'm going to be putting down is Avalon Sunset. I've got it on a wet palette. It's nice and runny, well, runny to a point. And I'm just going to, you'll have to put a couple of layers on, but I'm going to paint up the kind of armoured chest and the fatigues that she's got on here. Now a lot of people, it will be a darker colour if you want to do this, but I'm wanting to try and match this up with my gang, so I'm trying to bring it all in together. I'm doing this first before doing any flesh, because if I make any errors or mistakes here, I'm going to be able to cover them up a lot better with the flesh colours later. So what we're doing now, that took about 3, maybe 4 layers on some instance, just so I could actually get it nice and thin. I'm going to thin down some flesh gets yellow. I'm going to add it to the Avalon Sunset, and we are going to start kind of building up a bit of a highlight. So we've got that, a nice layer coming in, and the Avalon Sunset's going to be kind of like your base coat. Now a little of that has been applied. I'm not going to do multiple layers, just one, just to start off things. I'm going to really water down. So this is my Avalon Sunset, and I've really kind of watered it down into a layer consistency on my wet palette. I've got a nice fine tip on the brush, and what we're going to do is just to come in and start to sort of like highlight areas. So I'm wanting just the top of the leg to be a little bit more bright. I'm doing it with thin layers, so these will kind of dry a lot darker than what I'm putting them on, and then we'll be able to use the same colour as a bit of a highlight. For a final step, I'm just going to come in with some Cassandora Yellow, that's the one. And I'm just going to cut back in with just little bits of some shade. So it's just little tiny ones. Again, just using the really sort of like thin edge on that brush. Don't want it to go everywhere. I'm just wanting to cut a little bit of shade back into the model. So now we're going to start on the flesh, but before we're going to go with dark oak flesh, but make sure that on the face, before you go on the dark oak flesh, on the lower half of the face that I've got here, that you actually paint that Mechanica Standard Grey, because it is quite important. I've got two brushes. I've got one with a fine tip and I've got the one without the fine tip, and I'm just going to apply the Undercoat Flesh, which is a contrast paint by the way, all over the flesh areas, being careful not to get it on the great yellow that we've already done, and make sure that you cut it in with Mechanica Standard Grey first before proceeding with this. Now that won't take long to dry. When we've got that dry, we're going to cut back in with some Mechanica Standard Grey again, nicely watered down to kind of this consistency. And we're just going to layer that up. And of course, just leave the recess. And what we're doing is building up this kind of grey flesh tone that the Death Maidens seem to have. I'm just kind of making it a little zombie looking. I quite like the idea that the Death Maidens, of course, might actually be dead. We have the Mechanica Standard Grey on there, and now I'm going to add a very finish highlight, very watered down highlight of Dawnstone. And one final highlight, we're going to add some Kislev flesh to the Dawnstone, water it down, and this should bring a little bit of humanity back into that grey flesh. We're just going to very extreme sort of highlight. It's not going to be a very, it's not going to be the main ones. It's just like little bits of the edge, maybe a tiny bit on the old extremities like fingers. If you could try and get it on like the knuckles. And just make sure it's watered enough that you're not going to make any mistakes, and you can always go back and add an extra layer if need be. So next up we have, I think it's called Zaria's Purple, and we're going to use that to accent a lot of things. So I'm going to use it to block in this pad. I'm also going to use it to block in the cape as well. You'll need a couple of layers just to make sure that it's nice and thin, and you are getting there. So next up we're going to mix in some Genestealer Purple with our Zaria's Purple, and we are just going to kind of start to highlight this padding, keeping it nice and thin. And now just applying some pure Genestealer Cult Purple just as your edge highlight. We have our flesh down, and what I'm going to do now is to try and get the belt sorted. So I like to do leather belts, and this is just going to be a simple brown. So this is a Rhinox hide. I always want to call it bestial brown. I'm just going to put a couple of layers of this on. Lock that in. I always like to do a brown belt on a lot of items, simply because it breaks it away from the rest of the colour palette that you're using. It adds like another colour. So one of the first highlights we're going to be doing on a brown is just some Morn Fan Brown, and we're just going to kind of just highlight it as if natural light is catching it. We're not going to be doing any sort of detail leather effect this time round, at least. and just use this for a couple of layers. So let it dry and then come back and put a little bit more and make sure that you've got it quite translucent. And it should build up those highlights naturally. So that's pretty much all we're going to be doing with the belt, because it is a very small detail. We're not really wanting to concentrate too much time on it, but we are wanting to concentrate some time on these boots. So let's get the Abaddon Black out and let's ink these in. I'm saying ink these in. You're just going to do the whole boot as well, including the metal parts on the bottom. Careful not to get this on anything that you've already worked on so far. So as part of doing the black, I've also done the hood. And what we're going to do is to get some Dark Reaper, and we're going to mix that with a little bit in the wet palette there. And we're going to just layer this up. And you're going to have to come in with a couple of different multiple layers here, because I want this. You need to make sure that the paint is nice and thin. And then let it dry, of course. Go to the next section and just pick out. Don't have to do the metallic boots. We're going to be doing something else again later. Just pick out the highlight areas and maybe even across the boot itself. And when you've layered that up a little bit, just keep adding the Dawnstone in there. You now start adding, the Dark Reaper. Now you start adding Mechanicus Standard Grey to the mix. Again, making sure it's nice and thin so we can build up even layers, and we're not going to be doing too much at once. Use a thinner brush to do so. Just trying to get this on the edges rather than anything else. So we're kind of picking this up. Mechanicus Standard as a bit more of an extreme highlight. So we've got the black sorted. We've done a little casing on the back of the figure. We've also done the gun housing as well. That's just all just been done with a slight little shade. I like the idea of having the black quite dark. Going on to the head, let me try and get a focus here. We've got some Apothecary White contrast paint, and we're going to do the feathers. Now I have kind of blue tapped this in, but I might need to just hold it to keep it steady. If you want to, I don't like gluing mine into anything else. Don't worry if you go over the antlers with this. Just try and avoid the skull. The antlers will be painting properly in a moment. Okay, now I always seem to like yellow hair for some reason on models. I think it's the old school in me that I like goes for that old school blonde. Now, I've got contrast medium, about 3 parts to 1 part Nasreg yellow. I'm just going to put that onto the hair so it's not too yellowing, and it should put quite a lot of it through. Now just be careful, because you should have some feathers in here that you've already probably done, and you'll want, don't matter about the bands. The feathers you want to try and keep as clean as you possibly can. And this is a perfect surface to use contrast paint on, because it's pretty much what it's designed for. So let the yellow dry. I've then gone through any bone on this model. I need to go through and pick out the bone on here. We are going to be doing, we've basically painted it with your Shabty bone, just as a bit of a base, and I'm going to go over it with Skeleton Horde. This should make sure that we're not having to keep coming back and shade and highlight, because it'll actually do it all itself for us. Now we are going to grab on to some wood. We're first off going to be doing, the base for this is going to be Doombull. I'm going to use Doombull Brown. I'm going to highlight that up with some Scrag Brown, just doing it in layers. And making sure that we've got, doing all the antlers on here, and of course the hilt and any wood we're going to have on this particular model. So the bits of brown have been done, very good. And what I'm going to do now is to simply start with the metallics. So I'm going to use some Screaming Bell. I'm just going to call it Screaming Skull, but that's the yeah. And I'm going to use this on here. Make sure I'm in focus. Use this on the nice little bit that she's got across the stomach. I'm going to use it on this van brace, and I'm going to use it on any bangles that she's got. And once that's done, I'm going to put silver on the knee pads and any additional hooks. And any bangles on here as well will be painted with the Screaming Bell. So we've got the brown's nearly done. We've got the Screaming Bell added to the various different brass areas. I did go in with some Scrag just onto the fur. I've not done any we've not done any inks or washes at the moment. We're going to now come in for, we've got some Iron Hand Steel, and we're going to paint up any sort of metallic areas. So include these knee pads. Well, and anything else you want to be a steel colour, just again being really careful not to get it on anything else. So we are doing well by adding some of the metallics. We've got metallic silver now drying. I've got it on the feet, of course, and the edges of the weapons. There's some little tassel sections in the hair. You can see them here. And what we're just going to do with them, I'm just going to put I'm just going to paint them up, base them as it were with some corn red, and then I'm just going to highlight them just a little bit with the Evil Sun Scarlet. Then we've got the red on. We are going to cut back to the Screaming Bell, and we've got some Agrax Earthshade gloss glaze. Now I like the gloss glaze when it's on metallics. It really does make a difference. Just coat all of that. Once you've done the Agrax Earthshade gloss on all your Screaming Bell parts, what you need to do is normal Agrax Earthshade, do that on your reds, do that on here and on those brown bits, and then Nuln Oil all over your silver. So I've got my washers on, I'm just allowing those to dry, and we are going to get some Cantor Blue. A very thin brush, and we're just going to block this in here. And then get some Keldo Sky. Put that in there as well. It's a very small area, so you don't really need to do too much in the way of like wash, highlight. We're just wanting it to just stand out. For the silver highlights, we've just got some Rune Fang steel. Just going to there we go. We're just going to highlight a little bit. Now I have done the glove in steel. So going to just do a little tiny bits, pick up little highlights, and the edge of the fingers I'm going to use. Once you've got your silver highlight done, I've even put a little bit, kind of watered it down a little bit and put it into the Screaming Skull. Once that's completed, let's take these two bits of blue tick off so I can still stick their heads together. Let's stick them together. So as you can see, I've sped forward a little bit with this lady. I've just put little touches of white into the hair, and of course I've done the base to match the rest of my Necromunda, and I've painted her name Lilith on the back. So that is it. It's a nice, simple, very bright. I know it's very bright because, of course, I like the idea of that. It actually seems to be quite bright until you've got this Death Maiden, and she's got bits of black in there, and she's got very pale skin. I've enjoyed painting this one. Hope you guys have enjoyed watching my tutorial. If you did enjoy the content, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing. You can check out all my videos here on YouTube. You can also check them out at rootstem.co.uk. And there's also some blogs and things on there as well. Some latest news that I try and just keep up to date with what's happening with Games Workshop, and of course up to date with what's happening with the world of Warhammer 40k. Thank you very much guys for watching. We'll see you next time.